The cargo hold of the airborne Global Express 767 felt different today. Cargo specialist Maya Chen sat on a metal equipment crate, inventory tablet balanced on her knee, watching the flight crew laugh and share stories near the galley at 32. She'd mastered the art of becoming invisible when needed. It was a survival skill she'd perfected in the commercial aviation industry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Listen up, people, barked Captain Victor Reynolds, his authoritative voice cutting through the pre-flight chatter. The mission commander's weathered face carried the unmistakable arrogance of someone who'd spent decades being the unquestioned authority in the cockpit. We're hauling pharmaceutical supplies and emergency relief equipment to Auckland. Routine flight, but we've got weather concerns over the Pacific. Maya noticed how he emphasized "we" while his gaze deliberately skipped over her section of the cargo hold. She'd been assigned as special cargo supervisor for this flight, essentially a glorified box checker according to Reynolds' dismissive briefing yesterday. "Chen," Reynolds' voice sliced through the air like a knife. "You're just here to babysit the temperature-sensitive cargo. Stay out of the flight deck, keep your opinions to yourself, and maybe you'll learn something about real aviation." First Officer Jason Miller, fresh from training with barely 6 months at Global Express, snickered. "Don't worry, Chen, we'll try not to make too many scary turns with the cargo." Maya's jaw tightened, but her expression remained impassive. She'd heard worse. What they didn't know, what her personnel file carefully omitted, was that she'd logged over 1,500 hours piloting commercial aircraft before a corporate restructuring had buried her credentials. Her supervisor at the time had promised it was temporary, just until the merger paperwork sorted itself out. That was 4 years ago. Senior flight engineer Kevin Santos glanced at her with something that might have been sympathy. He was older, quieter, and seemed uncomfortable with Reynolds' attitude. When their eyes met, he offered a slight nod before returning to his systems checklist. The fourth crew member, Flight Attendant Zoe Parker, was reviewing emergency procedures. In the corner, she kept stealing glances at Maya as if trying to figure out why the captain treated her with such disdain. "Weather report shows significant turbulence over the South Pacific," Santos mentioned, his voice measured. "Might want to consider the northern route?" Reynolds waved him off dismissively. "I've flown this corridor 30 times, Santos." "A little. Turbulence never hurt anybody. We stick to the flight plan." Maya's stylus paused over her inventory app. She'd studied the meteorological data that morning, something she did out of habit, not requirement. The satellite imagery showed a developing cyclonic system that could create dangerous wind shear along their planned route. She opened her mouth to mention it, then caught Reynolds' warning glare. "Something to add, Chen?" His tone dripped with condescension. "No, sir. Just confirming the temperature-controlled pharmaceuticals are properly secured," she replied evenly. "Good. That's what you're here for." As the crew filed out toward the cockpit, Maya lingered, studying the weather charts left on the briefing table. The wind patterns were worse than Santos had mentioned, much worse. She pulled out her phone and quietly photographed the data, old habits from her previous life as an actual pilot. Outside, the Boeing 767 cargo jet sat on the tarmac. Like a massive silver bullet, its twin engines gleaming in the San Francisco morning sun. Maya had flown similar aircraft before, knew every system, every procedure, every sound the engines made when they were happy or stressed. The plane looked well maintained, but she noticed small details the others missed. Slight hydraulic seepage near the landing gear, unusual wear patterns on the thrust reversers, subtle irregularities that suggested recent hard landings. Santos was already in the cargo bay, running final security checks. He looked up as she approached. "You ever work aviation before joining cargo division?" Something like that, she replied, not wanting to lie but unable to tell the whole truth. You seem to know your way around aircraft pretty well. Before she could respond, Reynolds' voice echoed from the intercom. Chen, your babysitting station is in the cargo section. And Santos, hurry up with those cargo locks. I want wheels up in 15. Maya settled into her assigned jump seat near the temperature-controlled containers, strapping in with practiced efficiency. Through the small window, she watched the ground crew complete their final checks. Everything looked routine, professional, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the engines spooled up, their familiar whine filling the cabin, Miller's voice crackled over the intercom. Hope you're not afraid of turbulence, Chen. This big girl can get a little jumpy over the Pacific. Maya didn't respond. She was too busy listening to the engines, noting the subtle irregularity in the port turbofan that nobody else seemed to hear. Her fingers drummed against her tablet, not nervously, but methodically, the way a concert pianist might practice scales. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The 767 began its taxi toward the runway, and Maya closed her eyes, feeling the familiar rhythm of an aircraft coming alive. In 14 hours, they'd be in Auckland. What could possibly go wrong on a routine cargo run? She was about to find out that in commercial aviation, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. And sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is exactly who need when everything goes sideways. The flight started smoothly enough. Once they reached cruising altitude, Reynolds' voice boomed over the intercom with characteristic swagger. Beautiful day for flying, ladies and gentlemen. Chen, you getting a good education back there? Maya had been monitoring the pharmaceutical containers, noting how they were shifting slightly more than they should. The tie-downs were regulation tight, but the weight distribution felt off. She'd seen it before. Poorly balanced loads that could shift dangerously in turbulence. Everything secure, Captain, she replied evenly. Miller laughed over the radio. She's so by the book. Relax, Chen. This isn't your first day in aviation. What they didn't know was that Maya was anything but relaxed. Her trained eye had caught several concerning details. The hydraulic pressure gauge in the maintenance panel read slightly low when she'd checked it during boarding. The weather radar displayed storm cells building along their route, and Santos kept glancing at his instruments with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. 30 minutes into the flight, the first real problem emerged. Captain, I'm seeing unusual vibration readings in the cargo bay, Santos reported, his voice careful. Feels like a load shift, Maya added. She was already moving, unstrapping herself to inspect the cargo. The pharmaceutical container marked time sensitive, temperature critical had worked one of its restraints loose. The expensive biologicals inside were worth millions, and if they shifted during turbulence, they could not only be destroyed, but could damage the aircraft. I can resecure it, she called toward the cockpit intercom. Negative, Reynolds snapped. That's Santos' job. You stay put. But Santos was locked into running essential systems checks, and Maya could see the restraint wasn't just loose. It was failing. The metal bracket had a stress fracture that would only get worse. Captain, that bracket's compromised. If we hit turbulence, Chen, I said stay in your seat. That's an order. She watched the container rock gently with each air pocket, the damaged bracket flexing dangerously. Her hands clenched around her tablet. She knew how to fix it, had done it dozens of times before, but Reynolds' ego wouldn't let the cargo specialist do anything beyond her assigned role. Parker noticed her concern and leaned forward. Maybe we should let her check it? Parker, Reynolds cut her off. I don't need a cargo handler telling us how to secure freight. The irony was bitter. Maya had more experience with aircraft operations than anyone else on board, except perhaps Reynolds himself, but her current classification made her invisible. She pulled out her phone and quietly documented the failing restraint, timestamping the photos. If something went wrong, there would be evidence. Santos finally unstrapped and moved to check the cargo. His face went pale when he saw the bracket. "Captain, she's right. This is about to fail completely." A long pause, then Reynolds' voice, tight with irritation. "Fine, fix it. But Chen stays out of the way." Santos worked quickly, but Maya could see he was struggling. The replacement bracket required a specific technique. You had to pre-stress the mount to account for load dynamics during flight maneuvers. It was advanced cargo management, not standard training. "Torque it to spec, then back off a quarter." "Turn," Maya said quietly. Santos looked at her sharply. "What?" "The mount flexes during bank turns. If you over-tighten it, the bracket shears under lateral stress." "How do you?" Reynolds' voice crackled with anger. "What's the holdup?" "Almost finished, Captain," Santos replied, following Maya's advice. "The mount's seated properly." He gave her a questioning look, but before he could ask where she'd learned cargo engineering, they hit the first real turbulence. The 767 bucked like an angry horse. Everyone grabbed for handholds as the aircraft pitched and rolled. In the cockpit, alarms started beeping. "What the hell?" Miller's voice pitched high with stress. Maya was already looking out the window. The Pacific Ocean below was white-capped with massive waves, and the aircraft was shaking harder than it should for normal. Turbulence. This was wind shear, exactly what the weather data had predicted. "Captain," Santos called forward, "recommend we divert north around this system." "Negative. We're not adding 2 hours of flight time for a little chop." But this wasn't a little chop. Maya had flown through enough oceanic weather to recognize the signs. The wind patterns were chaotic, dangerous. She could feel it in the aircraft's response, the way it fought the controls, the irregular buffeting that meant they were flying into a storm system that could tear them apart. She quietly activated her phone's voice recorder and spoke into it, barely audible. 11:47 hours. Experiencing severe wind shear approximately 1,200 miles west of Hawaiian Islands. Recommend immediate course correction to northern route. It was the kind of detailed observation that came from experience. Experience Reynolds didn't know she had. Parker looked green around the gills as another violent shake rattled the aircraft. "Maybe we should," she began. "If you're going to be sick, Parker, use the bag," Reynolds snapped. "And everyone else, shut up. I'm trying to fly this aircraft." Maya exchanged glances with Santos. They both knew Reynolds was in over his head, but aviation hierarchy meant they were stuck, watching him make potentially fatal decisions as the storm loomed ahead. The worst part wasn't the danger. It was sitting helplessly while someone else's pride put all their lives at risk. But Maya had learned patience in her previous life. Sometimes you had to wait for the right moment to act. That moment was coming sooner than any of them expected. The weather deteriorated rapidly. What had been moderate turbulence became violent shaking that rattled every bolt in the aircraft. Maya gripped her seat as the 767 pitched wildly, thrown around by wind currents that seemed to come from every direction at once. "Jesus Christ," Miller's voice cracked over the intercom. "Captain, we need to abort this route," Santos urged. "Hold your course," Reynolds snarled back, but Maya could hear the strain in his voice. "It's just oceanic turbulence." It wasn't. Maya had studied the weather patterns that morning, and this was exactly the kind of severe storm system that had claimed aircraft before. The cyclone was creating a deadly corridor of wind shear, and they were flying straight into it. The aircraft suddenly dropped 100 feet in an air pocket. Parker made a strangled sound and fumbled for her air sickness. "Bag." The cargo containers groaned against their restraints, and Maya heard the ominous sound of metal stress testing itself. "Captain," Santos called from his position, voice tight with concern, "we're getting load shift warnings. These containers." aren't going to hold if this keeps up. Then secure them better. But there was no better way to secure cargo that was being thrown around by forces that exceeded design specifications. Maya watched the precious pharmaceutical containers strain against their mounts. If they broke free, they could become deadly projectiles. Through the window, she caught glimpses of the storm below. Massive, swirling cloud formations disappeared into a churning maelstrom. There was nowhere to land for thousands of miles in any direction except their destination. Auckland, now hidden behind a wall of storm clouds. Auckland Control, this is Global Express 457. Reynolds' voice crackled over the radio. Requesting immediate weather update. Static then. Global Express 457. Weather has deteriorated beyond safe approach parameters. Recommend you divert. To alternate field. Negative Auckland. We have priority medical cargo. Continuing approach. Maya's blood went cold. Priority medical cargo was exactly what they were carrying, but that didn't mean they had to die delivering it. There were protocols for weather diversions, established procedures that existed specifically to prevent the kind of disaster they were flying toward. She quietly pulled out her phone and opened the weather app. The satellite view showed the storm system had intensified beyond all predictions. The entire approach to Auckland was choked with turbulence that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Another violent shake threw everyone against their restraints. This time, Maya heard something she'd hoped never to hear again. The subtle change in engine pitch that meant they were fighting wind shear beyond the aircraft's design limits. "Captain," she called forward, "request permission to review the weather data." "Chen, you're not qualified to read weather reports." But she was more qualified than anyone else on the aircraft. As it turned out, her previous assignment had included specialized training in oceanic weather interpretation, knowledge that was buried in classified corporate files Reynolds had never seen. Parker was looking increasingly terrified. Santos caught Maya's eye and mouthed the word, "Help." Even Miller, for all his bravado, sounded increasingly panicked over the radio. The decisive moment came when the aircraft encountered a severe downdraft that dropped them 300 feet in seconds. The pharmaceutical containers broke free from their primary restraints, held only by the secondary cables that were never meant to take full load. "We're losing cargo," Santos shouted. "Captain Reynolds," Maya's voice cut through the chaos, calm and authoritative, "you need to abort this approach immediately. The wind shear is exceeding aircraft limits." "Shut up, Chen. You're cargo crew, not flight crew." But her tone had changed. Gone was the deferential cargo specialist following orders. This was the voice of someone who'd commanded aircraft in conditions that would terrify seasoned pilots. Santos noticed the change immediately. There was something in Maya's bearing that suggested she knew exactly what she was talking about. "Sir," Santos added quietly, "maybe we should listen to her. Are you questioning my command?" The aircraft bucked again, harder this time. Through the cockpit door, Maya could see Miller struggling with the controls, his knuckles white on the yoke and sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool cabin air. This was the moment Maya had to make a choice: stay in her assigned role and watch them all die, or reveal what she really was and risk everything. She unbuckled her harness and stood, moving forward with the steady gait of someone accustomed to aircraft in crisis. "Captain Reynolds, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Get back in your seat. I've flown this route before in worse weather than this, and if you don't turn this aircraft around in the next 60 seconds, we're all going to die." The quiet certainty in her voice made everyone freeze. Even Reynolds turned to look at her, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been fear. "You've never flown anything, Chen. You're just—" "I'm the pilot they don't want you to know about," Maya said simply. "And right now, that pharmaceutical cargo you're so worried about delivering won't help anyone if we're scattered across the Pacific Ocean." The aircraft shuddered again, and this time the port engine coughed ominously. Time was running out, and Maya was done playing the role of helpless observer. What happened next would determine whether they lived to see another sunrise. The revelation hung in the air like a live wire. Maya stood in the aircraft's narrow corridor, her stance balanced and confident despite the violent turbulence, while Reynolds stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You're lying," he said flatly. "Check my file." Maya's voice remained calm. Service record 2019 to 2021, 1,500 hours piloting Boeing 767s and 777s for transoceanic airlines, including tropical storm diversions that make this look like a gentle breeze. Santos was already moving toward the electronic flight bag in the cockpit. In commercial aviation, personnel records were accessible to senior crew during emergency situations, a safety protocol in case of crew incapacitation. "Don't you dare," Reynolds snapped at Santos, but the flight engineer was already typing Maya's employee ID into the system. His eyes widened as the classified sections of her file populated on screen. "Captain, she's telling the truth. She's rated on this aircraft. Multiple commendations for flying in extreme conditions." Parker looked back and forth between them, confused. "Then why is she?" "Because 4 years ago, someone decided that Global Express shouldn't have so many senior female pilots after the merger," Maya said quietly. "I was reassigned to cargo operations while they sorted out the redundancies. The sorting never happened." Miller's voice crackled through the intercom, tight with panic. "Whatever you're discussing back there, we need to decide now. I'm losing control authority." Through the cockpit door, Maya could see the young co-pilot fighting the controls. The aircraft was pitching and rolling unpredictably, caught in wind currents that were beyond his skill level. Reynolds was frozen, his pride warring with the growing realization that his decisions had put them all in mortal danger. "Captain," Maya said, her voice cutting through his paralysis, "you have 2 choices. Let me help, or explain to our families why you let your ego kill us all." For a moment, the only sounds were the aircraft's groaning and the whistle of wind through stressed metal. Then Santos made the decision for all of them. "Maya," he said, using her first name for the first time, "what do you need?" "Access to the controls and weather radar. We're not aborting, we're going to thread the needle." Reynolds' face went purple. "You can't just, I can and I will." Maya was already moving toward the cockpit. "Miller, I'm coming forward. Keep her level as best you can. Who are you?" The co-pilot asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Someone who's done this before." As Maya slid into the jump seat behind the pilots, she quickly assessed the situation. The weather radar showed massive storm cells converging on their position, but there was a narrow corridor, barely wide enough for the 767, that offered a possible path through. She pointed to the radar display. "See that gap? It's only going to be open for about 7 minutes before the storm systems merge." Miller squinted at the screen. That's impossibly narrow." "No, it's difficult. There's a difference." Her hands hovered over the backup controls, muscle memory from thousands of hours returning despite 4 years of forced inactivity. The aircraft's responses felt familiar, like greeting an old friend. "I need you to transfer control to the secondary station," she told Miller. "I can't do that without the captain's order." "Then get it," Maya said simply. All eyes turned to Reynolds. His career was built on never showing weakness, never admitting he was wrong. But as another violent downdraft slammed the aircraft, sending unsecured items flying through the cabin, the mathematics of survival began to outweigh the politics of pride. "Captain," Santos said quietly, "she knows this aircraft better than any of us." Parker nodded frantically. "Please, sir. I've got a daughter waiting for me at home." Reynolds' hands clenched into fists. Everything in his worldview said that admitting a female cargo handler could outfly him was tantamount to professional suicide. But the alternative was literal suicide. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "But if you crash my aircraft, You won't be around to do anything about it," Maya said with quiet confidence. "Miller, transfer control now." As the secondary controls came online, Maya felt the familiar weight of an aircraft responding to her touch. The 767 was still bucking and rolling, but now she could feel its intentions, understand what it was trying to tell her about the air currents around them. "Santos, I need you to redistribute the cargo load. Move the pharmaceutical containers forward by 3 positions. We need the center of gravity shifted for the kind of flying we're about to do. On it, Parker, monitor our fuel consumption. We're going to be making some turns that drink fuel." "Yes, ma'am." As her crew, and they were her crew now, she realized, jumped into action, Maya studied the narrow gap in the storm system. It would require precision flying that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their limits, but it was possible. What she didn't tell them was that 3 years ago, she'd flown through worse conditions to deliver emergency medical supplies to tsunami victims in Indonesia. That mission had earned her a commendation that was buried in classified corporate files. Today's mission would either prove she still had what it took, or end all their careers permanently. Time to find out which. Maya's hands settled on the controls with the certainty of someone returning home. The 767 responded immediately to her touch, the violent bucking smoothing into controlled flight despite the churning air around them. "How is she doing that?" Parker whispered to Santos. "Experience," Santos replied, watching Maya's hands move over the instruments with practiced precision. "Look at her. She's not fighting the turbulence, she's using it." It was true. Where? Miller had been wrestling with the controls, trying to force the aircraft into submission. Maya was working with the air currents. She found the smooth patches between the violent downdrafts, riding thermals like a surfer, finding the perfect wave. "Auckland Control, this is Global Express 457, she said into the radio, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Be advised we are continuing approach through the Eastern Weather Corridor. Expect arrival in 17 minutes. Global Express 457 negative. Weather conditions are beyond safe parameters. Copy that, Auckland Control. We're not flying safe parameters, we're flying smart ones." Reynolds sat rigid in his seat, watching his career evaporate with every smooth maneuver Maya executed. She was making it look easy, flying that should have been impossible for anyone. Certainly impossible for a cargo specialist who wasn't supposed to know which end of the aircraft went forward. But Maya wasn't just flying, she was teaching. "Miller, watch the pressure differential on the altimeter. See how it fluctuates before we hit turbulence? That's your early warning system." The young co-pilot leaned forward, fascinated despite his terror. "I never noticed that before. Most people don't. It takes a few hundred hours in tropical weather to develop the eye for it." "How many hours do you have?" he asked. "Enough." What she didn't say was that those hours had been earned in some of the most dangerous flying conditions on Earth. Typhoon evacuations, medical emergency flights, search and rescue operations that pushed aircraft and crew beyond their design limits, the kind of experience that couldn't be taught in simulators or classrooms. Santos had finished redistributing the cargo and returned to his station. "Loads balanced. How did you know to move it forward?" "Weight distribution affects how the aircraft responds to wind shear. Too much weight aft, and you lose elevator authority in downdrafts. Too much forward, and you get nose heaviness in updrafts. They don't teach that in flight engineer school." "They should." Through the windscreen, the storm-shrouded New Zealand coastline began to emerge from the clouds. Auckland's runway was barely visible through the swirling mist, but Maya could see it clearly, a narrow ribbon of concrete that looked impossibly small from their altitude. "There's no way we can land in this," Reynolds said, his voice hollow. "Yes, there is," Maya replied. "But not with a standard approach." She began a descending spiral that used the storm's wind patterns to slow their descent. It was an advanced technique that required split-second timing and perfect knowledge of how air moved around terrain features. "This is insane," Miller muttered, but his voice held admiration rather than fear. "This is flying," Maya corrected. "What we were doing before was just falling with style." As they descended through the cloud layer, the Auckland runway came into full view. It looked even smaller than Maya remembered, surrounded by turbulence that rose like invisible walls into the storm. Auckland Tower, Global Express 457 on final approach. Clear the runway and have medical teams standing by for the pharmaceuticals. Global Express 457, who is this? You don't sound like Captain Reynolds. Maya glanced at Reynolds, who was staring out the window with the expression of a man watching his worldview collapse. She keyed the radio again. "Auckland Tower. This is cargo specialist Maya Chen, assuming command due to exceptional weather conditions beyond the primary cruise capabilities." Silence on the radio then. "Say again, Global Express 457? Did you say cargo specialist?" "Affirmative. The medical supplies will be delivered as scheduled." Behind her, she heard Parker chuckle nervously. "This is either going to be the best landing ever or the last one we ever make." "It's going to be perfect," Santos said quietly. He'd been watching Maya work, and there was something in her movements that spoke of absolute competence. She knows exactly what she's doing. As they lined up for final approach, Maya realized that everything was about to change. Word would spread quickly through the aviation community about the cargo specialist who'd taken control of a 767 in impossible weather. There would be questions, investigations, career ramifications for everyone involved. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now there was only the aircraft, the weather, and the runway that seemed to grow larger with each passing second. "Gear down," she called. "Gear down and locked," Miller responded, his voice steady now. He was learning to trust her. "Flaps to landing configuration. Flaps set." The 767 descended through the last layer of turbulence, settling into the smooth approach that Maya had been visualizing since they entered the storm system. Everything was coming together exactly as she'd planned. What none of them could have predicted was the audience waiting for them on the ground. The landing was flawless. Maya brought the 767 down through the swirling winds with the precision of a surgeon, touching down on the center line of the narrow strip with barely a bump. The aircraft rolled out smoothly, engines winding down as she applied brakes with just the right pressure to stop them well short of the runway's end. "Jesus Christ," Miller breathed. That was beautiful." In the cabin, Parker was already unbuckling her harness, a grin spreading across her face. "Best landing I've experienced in 12 years of flying." Even Santos looked impressed, his fear replaced by something approaching awe. "Ma'am, where did you learn to fly like that?" But Reynolds sat silent, his face a mask of barely controlled rage and humiliation. Everything he'd believed about his own superiority had been shattered in the space of 30 minutes. As the engine spooled down, Maya began the post-flight checklist with the same calm efficiency she'd shown throughout the crisis. But she could see ground personnel gathering outside the aircraft, more than the usual cargo handling crew. "Looks like we've got company." Through the windscreen, Maya could see a cluster of officials approaching the aircraft. Among them was Diane Nakamura, the regional director of flight operations, a woman whose reputation for no-nonsense leadership was legendary throughout Global Express. "This is bad. This is very bad. For you, maybe, not for her." The jetway connected with a characteristic thump, and the first person to board was Director Nakamura herself. She was a compact woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind her came Operations Manager Robert Kwan and Safety Officer Sarah Domingo. Reynolds stood immediately, his posture rigidly professional. "Director Nakamura, ma'am, I can explain." "Can you? Because what I heard on the radio was that cargo specialist Chen took control of your aircraft. Is that accurate?" "Ma'am, the situation was—" "I'm not asking you, Captain." Nakamura's gaze shifted to Maya, who had remained seated at the controls, completing her shutdown procedures. "Specialist Chen?" Maya secured the last switch and turned to face the director. "Yes, ma'am. I assumed control when weather conditions exceeded the crew's capabilities." "And you're qualified on this aircraft?" "Yes, ma'am. Though not officially assigned as flight crew." Nakamura nodded slowly. "Mr. Kwan, pull Specialist Chen's complete service record. Ms. Domingo, I want a full investigation of this incident. And Captain Reynolds, you're grounded pending review." Reynolds' face went white. "Director, this is highly irregular. A cargo specialist cannot watch a crew risk lives due to incompetence without acting. Or would you prefer I explain to families why their loved ones died because you were too proud to accept help?" The silence that followed was deafening. Miller and Parker stood frozen, uncertain whether they were about to witness careers ending or beginning. Santos stepped forward. "Director, if I may, Specialist Chen saved our lives. Captain Reynolds refused to divert when conditions became dangerous, and without her intervention, we would have crashed. Is that your assessment, Mr. Santos?" "Yes, ma'am." "Absolutely." Nakamura turned to Miller. "Lieutenant?" The young co-pilot glanced nervously at Reynolds, then straightened his shoulders. "The specialist's flying was exceptional, ma'am. Better than anything I've seen in flight training. And you, Miss Parker?" "She was amazing, ma'am. Cool as ice, knew exactly what to do." Nakamura absorbed this, then looked back at Maya. "Specialist, you're aware that taking control of an aircraft without proper authorization is a serious violation of company policy?" "Yes, ma'am. And you did it anyway?" "Yes, ma'am. The alternative was letting everyone die." For the first time, Nakamura's stern expression cracked slightly. "Mr. Kwan, what does her service record show?" Kwan had been scanning his tablet throughout the conversation. His eyebrows rose as he read. "Ma'am, Specialist Chen has extensive flight time on Boeing wide bodies, including emergency operations. Her pilot credentials were transferred to cargo operations due to administrative restructuring 4 years ago. Allegedly? There's no clear documentation of why the transfer occurred, ma'am. Her flight evaluations were all exemplary." Nakamura's expression darkened. She'd been in aviation long enough to recognize corporate games when she saw them. Someone had buried a qualified pilot for reasons that had nothing to do with competence. "Captain Reynolds, you were told you had an experienced cargo specialist assigned to your crew, and you chose to treat her as invisible." "Ma'am, her assignment—" "Clearly stated, her assignment was wrong. And your pride nearly killed 5 people and destroyed a multi-million-dollar aircraft." She turned back to Maya. "Specialist Chen, effective immediately. You're reassigned to flight operations. Mr. Kwan will process the paperwork restoring your pilot status." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. You're also facing disciplinary action for insubordination." Maya nodded calmly. "Understood, ma'am. However, given the circumstances and the testimony of your crew, I'm recommending that any disciplinary action be suspended in favor of commendation for exceptional performance under pressure." Reynolds made a strangled sound. "Ma'am, this sets a dangerous precedent. The dangerous precedent is allowing incompetent officers to endanger lives because they're too arrogant to recognize superior skill regardless of gender or job title. You're facing a formal investigation, Captain. I suggest you use the time to consider whether your ego is worth more than the lives of your crew." As the officials filed off the aircraft, Santos clapped Maya on the shoulder. Well, that was interesting. Maya allowed herself a small smile. It's not over yet. There'll be more investigations, more questions. Let them ask. We know what really happened here. You saved our lives. That's all that matters. But Maya knew it was more complicated than that. She'd broken protocol, challenged authority, and forced a reckoning with a system that had tried to bury her talents. The aftermath would be messy, political, and potentially career-ending for multiple people. Still, as she looked at the faces of her crew now, not Reynolds, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 4 years, the satisfaction of flying where she belonged. The investigation took 4 weeks, 4 weeks of interviews, testimony, and corporate maneuvering that reached all the way to Global Express headquarters in Chicago. Maya found herself at the center of a storm that had less to do with aviation and more to do with the industry's ongoing struggle with gender equality and institutional change. Director Nakamura had been true to her word. Maya's pilot status was provisionally restored, and she was reassigned to flight operations training at the Auckland base until the investigation concluded. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source. Specialist Chen? Operations Manager Kwan knocked on the door of Maya's temporary office where she'd been reviewing flight procedures. You have visitors. The crew from Global Express 457, Santos, Miller, and Parker, stood in the hallway. Looking uncharacteristically formal, Santos held a manila folder thick with documents. Mind if we come in? Maya's office was standard corporate issue, functional but Spartan. The three filed in and stood awkwardly until she gestured for them to sit. How did the investigation go for you? Clean, completely exonerated. Turns out when you tell the truth about someone saving your life, the investigators tend to believe you. That's actually why we're here. The investigation turned up some interesting information about your career adjustment 4 years ago. Maya's stomach tightened. She'd suspected there was more to her reassignment than simple administrative reshuffling, but she'd never been able to prove it. What kind of information? Santos pulled out several documents. It turns out Captain Reynolds wasn't the first officer who complained about having a female pilot under his command. 4 years ago, Chief Pilot William Garrison, Reynolds' mentor, filed a formal complaint claiming that female pilots created unnecessary tension in long-haul operations. That's not unusual. Those complaints come up regularly. But this one was different. Because Chief Pilot Garrison had influence with the Personnel Review Board during the merger, he managed to get several female pilots reassigned to support roles under the guise of streamlining operations, including you. Your reassignment wasn't random, Maya. It was targeted. Maya stared at the documents, her suspicions confirmed. But it felt hollow somehow. 4 years of her life. 4 years of being treated like she didn't belong in a cockpit. All because someone with power had decided her gender mattered more than her skills. There's more. The investigation also revealed something about the medical emergency supplies we delivered that day. What about them? The temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals. They were experimental anti-rejection drugs for a heart transplant patient. Dr. Amelia Sato, 36 years old, mother of 3. Without those drugs, the transplant would have failed. The weight of that hit Maya harder than she'd expected. Their dangerous flight, the confrontation with Reynolds, the career upheaval, it had all led to saving someone's life. Someone with a family, a future, dreams that almost ended in a hospital bed. How is she? Recovering. Full prognosis is excellent. She asked us to give you this. He handed Maya a handwritten note. The paper was simple hospital stationery, the handwriting slightly shaky but determined. Ms. Chen, I heard what you did to get my medication to Auckland on time. I don't know you, but my children Malia, Kai, and Noah will grow up with their mother because of your courage. Thank you for not letting them lose me. You've given us all a future. With eternal gratitude, Amelia Sato. Maya's vision blurred slightly. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "There's one more thing," Santos said. "Nakamura wanted us to give you this." He handed her an official envelope with her name typed across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, orders for a new assignment. Maya read it twice before. The words sank in. Senior First Officer Training Program, with fast track to captain qualification. Parker grinned. "Apparently your unconventional flying techniques caught the attention of some people in very high places. But I'm just a cargo specialist. Not even officially a pilot anymore." "Not anymore," Santos interrupted, pointing to the bottom of the page. There it was, in official corporate typesetting. Promotion to Senior First Officer effective immediately. With assignment to Global Express International Heavy Division. They were giving her the controls of the company's flagship routes, the prestigious long-haul flights that only the most skilled pilots were trusted to operate. "What about Reynolds?" she asked. Santos's expression hardened. "Permanently. Grounded. Safety Board review found multiple previous incidents of dangerous decision-making. Turns out endangering your crew while refusing assistance isn't looked upon favorably by the review board." "And Chief Pilot Garrison?" Maya's voice was carefully neutral. "Early retirement," Miller said, his tone suggesting the retirement hadn't been entirely voluntary. "Effective immediately." Maya looked at the three people who had stood by her when it mattered most. "Why did you all testify for me? You could have stayed neutral, protected your own careers." Santos shrugged. "Because you saved our lives. Because you were right and Reynolds was wrong. Because sometimes doing the right thing matters more than protecting yourself. Plus," Miller added with a grin, "you're the best pilot any of us have ever flown with. It would have been criminal to let the company waste that talent." Parker nodded agreement. "My daughter's going to grow up in a world where maybe her gender won't determine her career opportunities. People like you are making that possible." As they prepared to leave, Santos turned back. "We're all pulling for you in the training program, Maya. Don't let them intimidate you. You belong there." After they left, Maya sat alone in her office, holding the orders that would change her life. Outside her window, she could see aircraft taking off from Auckland International, sleek passenger jets and massive cargo planes that pushed across the Pacific skies. Tomorrow she would start a new chapter, not as a cargo specialist or a logistics coordinator, but as what she'd always been meant to be, a pilot who could fly anything with wings. The note from Amelia Sato crinkled softly in her pocket, a reminder that sometimes the most important flights are the ones nobody sees coming. 3 months later, the Global Express Boeing 777-300 gleamed in the morning sun on the San Francisco flight line, its massive twin engines and distinctive wings making it one of the most recognizable aircraft in commercial aviation. Maya stood beside it, running through her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. "All systems checked and ready," Senior Officer Chen called First Officer Jacob Riley, the young pilot who'd been assigned as her co-pilot for this prestigious route. "Thank you, Riley," Maya replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had replaced the careful deference of her cargo specialist days. "Weather report?" "Clear across the Pacific. Mild turbulence near Japan, but nothing significant." Maya nodded, completing her exterior walk-around. After her experience during the Auckland storm, the airline had implemented her recommendation that pilots personally verify the aircraft's exterior condition, rather than relying solely on maintenance reports. It was just one of several protocol changes that had come from the incident. Her radio crackled to life. "Global 772, this is operations. You're cleared for boarding and pushback on schedule. Global 772 copies, commencing boarding procedures." As she climbed the air stairs to the flight deck of the massive airliner, Maya reflected on how much had changed. The training program had pushed her skills beyond anything she'd imagined possible, flying the most advanced commercial aircraft in the world. Her experience during the storm had been incorporated into the airline's emergency weather training, and she'd been asked to help develop new protocols for in-flight authority transitions. "First time flying to Tokyo?" Riley asked as they settled into the cockpit and began their pre-flight checks. "As senior officer," Maya replied. "I've done this route before, but not from this seat." What she didn't mention was that her last flight to Tokyo had been as a cargo specialist, silently watching as another pilot, less skilled but more privileged, occupied the seat she now sat in. The irony wasn't lost on her. The boarding process went smoothly, and soon they were pushing back from the gate, the massive aircraft moving with surprising grace despite its size. "Global 772, this is Tower. You're cleared for taxi to runway 28R. As they taxied toward the runway, Maya noticed a familiar face through the terminal windows. Director Nakamura was watching the aircraft move, a subtle smile on her normally stern features. Maya gave a small nod of acknowledgement, which Nakamura returned before turning away. The takeoff was textbook perfect, the powerful engines lifting the fully loaded 777 into the clear California sky with seemingly effortless power. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, Riley glanced over at her. "You know, everyone's talking about what happened in Auckland," he said. "It's become something of a legend in training." Maya focused on adjusting their climb profile. "Legends tend to grow with each telling." "Maybe, but the core story doesn't change. You stood up when it mattered, even when it could have cost you everything." As they leveled off at cruising altitude over the vast Pacific, the autopilot engaged and monitoring systems all showing normal, Riley continued. "I had Captain Reynolds for my check ride, you know, before everything happened." Maya looked at him sharply. "What was that like?" "Terrifying. He failed me twice for lack of decisiveness before passing me on the third try." "And now?" Riley's expression was thoughtful. "Now I understand what real decisiveness looks like. It's not about never doubting yourself or admitting when you need help. It's about knowing when to act, even when the rules say you shouldn't." They flew in comfortable silence for a while, the vast ocean passing beneath them, before Riley spoke again. "There's something else you should know. Global Express has started a new mentoring program. Pathways to the flight deck, specifically focused on recruiting women and minorities into pilot training." Maya raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected for such a traditional company." "Nakamura pushed it through the board after what happened with you. They want you to be the program director once you've completed your captain certification." The offer took Maya by surprise. She'd been focused so intently on reclaiming her own career that she hadn't thought about helping others find theirs. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that." Riley laughed. "That's exactly why you're perfect for it. You know what it's like to have your dreams derailed by politics and prejudice. You know how to fight back without breaking completely." As they continued across the Pacific, Maya found herself thinking about all the other talented women who might have been sidelined like she was, pushed into supporting roles because someone decided they didn't belong in command positions. 6 hours into the flight, they hit the turbulence that had been forecast near Japan. It was mild compared to the Auckland storm, but Maya noticed Riley tensing slightly as the aircraft began to bounce. "Relax your grip," she said quietly. "Feel what the aircraft is telling you." "I'm trying, but it always feels like we're about to lose control." "That's because you're trying to control it completely. Aircraft in turbulence are like horses. If you grip too tight, they fight back. Hold the reins gently. Guide rather than force." She demonstrated, her hands resting lightly on the controls during a manual flight segment, making subtle adjustments that smoothed out the ride despite the choppy air. How did you learn to fly like this? Riley asked, watching her technique closely. Necessity, Maya replied. When you're flying relief supplies into typhoon zones, you either learn to dance with turbulence or you don't complete the mission. Is that what you did before Global Express? Maya nodded. Transoceanic's humanitarian division. We flew where commercial flights wouldn't go. Disaster zones, remote areas, anywhere traditional airlines couldn't or wouldn't serve. Why did you leave? The question brought back memories Maya had tried to suppress, the corporate merger, the gradual realization that her career was being systematically dismantled. The day she'd been called into an office and told her, temporary reassignment to cargo operations. I didn't leave. I was removed. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not bitter. But that's in the past now. As they began their descent into Tokyo Haneda International Airport, Maya noticed something she hadn't expected, a calm certainty that had been missing during her years in cargo. Not just confidence in her flying skills, but a deeper assurance that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The landing was smooth despite gusty crosswinds, the massive 777 settling onto the runway with precision that drew an appreciative nod from Riley. I've never seen anyone land a heavy in crosswinds that smoothly, he said as they taxied to the gate. Practice, Maya replied, but she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. As they completed their shutdown checklist and prepared to leave the aircraft, Maya's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Amelia Sato, the heart transplant recipient whose life had been saved by their Auckland flight. 6-month checkup today. Doctors say my new heart is performing perfectly. Taking my kids to the beach this weekend. Something I never thought I'd do again. Thank you for making this possible. P.S. I told my daughter about you. Now she wants to be a pilot. Attached was a photo of Amelia with her 3 children, all smiling on what appeared to be a hospital steps. A hand-drawn card visible in the youngest child's hands with a crude airplane and the words, "Thank you, Miss Pilot," in childish lettering. Maya showed the message to Riley. This is why we fly, she said quietly. Not for the prestige or the paycheck, but for the lives we touch without ever meeting them. Riley nodded thoughtfully. I never thought about it that way. We're just moving people from place to place. We're not just moving people. We're connecting lives, delivering possibilities. Maya pocketed her phone. That medical cargo we carry in the hold? It's not just packages. It's someone's second chance. As they walked through Tokyo Haneda's sprawling international terminal, Maya noticed a group of young Japanese women in aviation academy uniforms watching her with undisguised interest. One of them, bolder than the rest, approached with a respectful bow. Excuse me, are you Senior Officer Chen? The pilot from the Auckland storm incident? Maya was startled. I am. How did you know? The young woman's eyes shone with admiration. They teach us about you at the academy now. About making difficult decisions when lives are at stake. The other cadets had gathered around, their expressions a mixture of awe and determination. Is it true you were demoted to cargo crew because you were female? Another asked. Maya hesitated, then decided they deserved honesty. The aviation industry has a long history of barriers for women. I encountered some of those barriers. But things are changing. Because of people like you, the first cadet said firmly. As they continued asking questions about flight techniques and career advice, Maya realized something important. Her story had traveled beyond Global Express, beyond even the aviation industry. It had become something more, an example for young women facing their own barriers, their own storms to navigate. Later, in her hotel room overlooking Tokyo's glittering skyline, Maya found herself writing an email to Director Nakamura, accepting the position as director of the Pathways program. Her journey from being sidelined to reclaiming her rightful place had a purpose beyond her own career. It was a blueprint for others facing similar challenges. There would always be storms, both in the skies and in the corporate corridors of aviation. There would always be people who believed certain jobs weren't meant for certain people. But Maya had learned that the most powerful response wasn't anger or resentment. It was excellence so undeniable it shattered preconceptions. As she looked out at the Tokyo night, Maya thought about the cadets she'd met, the lives that had been saved by that fateful flight to Auckland, and the note from Amelia Sato's child that she kept in her flight bag. Her story wasn't about proving she belonged in a man's world. It was about proving that skill, courage, and determination belonged to anyone willing to develop them, regardless of what others expected. And now, those qualities were going to help her open doors for others that had once been closed to her. Maya Chen's journey wasn't over. It was just beginning a new phase. From cargo specialist to senior first officer, from silence talent to mentor and pathfinder, she had become someone who could not just weather storms, but help others navigate through them. Tomorrow would bring another flight, another chance to demonstrate excellence, another opportunity to show that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly who need when everything goes sideways. 1 year later, Maya stood before a sea of eager faces in Global Express's state-of-the-art training facility in Denver. The audience, 30 young women from diverse backgrounds, represented the first cohort of the Pathways to the Flight Deck program. They watched her with a mixture of admiration and determination that reminded Maya of the Japanese aviation cadets she'd met in Tokyo. Aviation isn't just about flying machines, Maya said, pacing slowly across the stage. It's about making decisions under pressure. It's about knowing when to follow protocols and when those protocols might kill you. It's about trusting your training and instincts when every alarm in the cockpit is screaming at you. She paused, making eye contact with several participants. But more than anything, it's about belonging to yourself first. Not to the company, not to tradition, not to someone else's expectations of what a pilot should look like. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. But how do you handle it when people constantly question your abilities just because you're female? Maya considered the question carefully. It was one she'd faced throughout her career, even now as a newly minted captain with Global Express. Excellence isn't arguable, she finally replied. When you consistently perform at the highest level, bias has nothing to feed on. Yes, you'll work twice as hard to get half the recognition. That's unfortunately still true. But excellence speaks a language even prejudice can't ignore for long. The Pathways program had become Maya's passion project alongside her regular flying duties. With Director Nakamura's backing, she'd created a comprehensive training and mentorship initiative that identified promising female talent both within Global Express and from aviation schools worldwide. After the formal presentation, Maya noticed a quiet young woman lingering behind as the others filed out for the day's flight simulator sessions. "Something on your mind?" Maya asked. "I'm Zara Khalid," the woman said, her voice soft but determined. "I was a pilot for 5 years with Emirates before moving to the United States. Despite my experience, I've been working as a flight attendant for Global Express because my credentials weren't recognized." Maya felt a familiar surge of frustration. Zara's story echoed her own too closely. "Have you applied for the certification transfer program?" "3 times, Zara replied. "Always rejected for insufficient documentation, despite providing everything required." Maya made a quick decision. "Meet me tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., Simulator Bay 4, bring your logbook." The next morning, Maya arrived at the simulator to Kukufa. Finds Zara already waiting, logbook in hand. The massive Boeing 777 simulator, an exact replica of the aircraft's cockpit mounted on hydraulic stilts, hummed quietly as technicians prepared it for the day's training sessions. "Have you ever flown a 777?" Maya asked. "Only in simulators during Emirates training, never as pilot in command." "Today that changes." Maya nodded to the technician. Boot up the Auckland approach scenario. Maximum turbulence, 30-knot crosswind. The technician's eyes widened. Captain Chen, that's an examiner-level scenario. It's not designed for initial assessment. I'm aware. Maya's tone made it clear further discussion wasn't welcome. As they settled into the simulator's realistic cockpit, Maya explained, I could spend months fighting bureaucracy to get your credentials recognized, or I could show the chief training officer exactly what you can do. Actions over arguments. The simulation began with their aircraft already encountering severe turbulence on approach to Auckland, a scenario inspired by Maya's own experience but intensified for training purposes. Your aircraft, Maya said simply, transferring control. Zara hesitated only briefly before her hands moved to the controls with confident precision. Maya watched as the younger pilot's initial tension melted away, replaced by the focused calm of someone in their element. Zara handled the simulated storm with exceptional skill, finding the sweet spots between turbulent air masses just as Maya had taught her students. When an engine failure was unexpectedly added to the scenario, something the program wasn't supposed to include at this difficulty level, Zara adapted immediately, compensating for the asymmetric thrust while maintaining a stable approach path. Someone's trying to make you fail, Maya observed quietly. Zara's expression remained focused. They've been doing that my entire career, nothing new. The landing, despite the combined challenges of turbulence, crosswind, and engine failure, was textbook perfect. As the simulator settled, Maya noticed Chief Training Officer Victor Harmon standing in the observation room, his expression unreadable. Impressive, he said as they exited the simulator. Especially with the unauthorized engine failure scenario someone programmed in. His pointed look at the technician made it clear he knew exactly what had happened. Miss Khalid, I'd like to see your credentials in my office. Perhaps there's been an oversight in your application process. After Harmon left with Zara, Maya confronted the simulator technician. The engine failure wasn't part of the standard scenario. The man looked uncomfortable. Captain Reynolds called in a favor. Said we needed to maintain standards by making sure certain candidates were properly tested. Maya felt a cold anger settle in her chest. Reynolds, though grounded as a pilot, had maintained enough connections to continue causing problems from his new administrative position. Document this incident, she said quietly. Every detail, because this stops now. That evening, Maya found herself in Director Nakamura's office, along with Senior VP of Operations, Marcus Chen, no relation, and Chief Legal Officer Patricia Williams. The documentation of the simulator tampering was displayed on Nakamura's tablet. This goes beyond professional jealousy, Nakamura said, her voice tight with controlled anger. This is systematic discrimination, and it appears Reynolds isn't acting alone. Williams nodded grimly. We've uncovered a pattern. Female pilot candidates are 64% more likely to experience equipment malfunctions or scheduling errors during their qualification process. Middle Eastern and Asian candidates face even higher rates of these coincidences. The good news, Marcus Chen added, is that we now have documented evidence. The bad news is that this network has tentacles throughout multiple departments. Maya listened as they outlined the extent of the problem, a loosely organized group of traditionalists who believed commercial aviation should remain predominantly male and Western. They didn't call themselves anything so obvious as a men's club, operated through informal connections, subtle sabotage, and strategic placement of allies in key positions. What do you need from me? Maya asked finally. Nakamura's expression was resolute. We're creating a special task force to clean house. I want you to lead it. Maya blinked in surprise. I'm a pilot, not an investigator. You're a symbol. Williams corrected. The woman who took control when no one thought she could or should. The pilot who proved excellence trumps prejudice. We need your credibility. And your courage, Chen added quietly. Maya thought of Zara and all the others. Like her, talented pilots sidelined because they didn't fit someone's narrow vision of who belonged in a cockpit. What about my flying schedule? Temporarily reduced, Nakamura replied. You'll still command your Tokyo and London routes, but we're reassigning your shorter flights. This takes priority. The next morning, Maya sat in a converted conference room that had become task force headquarters, surrounded by personnel files and incident reports. Beside her, Zara Khalid, now officially reinstated as first officer with back pay, sorted through documentation of similar cases. 73 qualified female pilots either rejected, resigned, or reassigned in the past 5 years, Zara noted, compared to only 12 male pilots with similar qualifications. And look at the pattern of who replaced them. Maya pointed to another spreadsheet. All men, mostly from the same 5 flight schools, often with personal connections to the hiring managers. The door opened and Santos entered, his familiar face a welcome sight. After the Auckland incident, he'd been promoted to senior flight engineer instructor, but Maya hadn't seen him in months. I heard what you're doing, he said without preamble. I want in. This could get messy, Maya warned. People's careers will end. Santos shrugged. Careers that deserve to end. I've watched this happen for 20 years, Maya. Talented people pushed aside because they don't fit the mold. I'm done being a bystander. With Santos's insider knowledge of the training department, the investigation accelerated. They identified key players, documented patterns of discrimination, and built an irrefutable case showing that qualified candidates had been systematically excluded based on gender and ethnicity. The confrontation came sooner than Maya had expected. She was reviewing documentation in the task force room when Reynolds himself walked in, flanked by 2 other administrative managers she recognized as part of his inner circle. So this is the witch hunt headquarters, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. I should have known you wouldn't be satisfied with just taking my wings, Chen. You had to come after the whole system. Maya remained seated, her expression neutral. This isn't personal, Reynolds. The hell it isn't. You and Nakamura are dismantling decades of tradition because you can't handle the reality that men are naturally better suited to command positions. Maya gestured to the documentation spread across the table. These qualified pilots were rejected while less experienced men were hired. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence can be interpreted different ways, one of Reynolds' companions interjected smoothly. And bringing all this into the open only damages Global Express's reputation. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Maya stood finally, meeting Reynolds' gaze directly. Not the company's reputation, but your own. You can't stand that a cargo specialist, a woman, proved to be a better pilot than you when it mattered most. Reynolds' face flushed with anger. You got lucky in a storm. One flight doesn't make you special. You're right, Maya replied calmly. What makes me special is that I was willing to risk everything to save lives, while you were willing to risk lives to protect your ego. The tension in the room was palpable until Director Nakamura's voice cut through from the doorway. Captain Reynolds, I believe you have a meeting with Human Resources in 5 minutes. I wouldn't be late if I were you. After Reynolds and his associates departed, Nakamura turned to Maya. The board has seen the evidence. They've authorized a complete restructuring of the hiring and training departments. Reynolds and his core group are being terminated, effective immediately. Maya should have felt triumphant, but instead she felt strangely hollow. This won't change attitudes overnight. No, Nakamura agreed, but it sends a message. Excellence and integrity matter more than who you know or what you look like. The restructuring sent shockwaves through Global Express. Some veteran pilots resigned in protest, but most adapted to the new reality, one where qualification and performance truly determined advancement. 3 months after the investigation concluded, Maya found herself in the cockpit of Global Express's newest aircraft, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, preparing for its inaugural flight from San Francisco to Singapore. Beside her sat Zara Khalid, now fully certified as first officer. Nervous? Maya asked as they worked through the pre-flight checklist. Zara smiled. About the flight? No. About being part of history? A little. This wasn't just any inaugural flight. For the first time in Global Express's history, a long-haul international route would be commanded by an all-female flight deck crew. The decision had generated both praise and criticism in aviation circles, with some traditionalists claiming it was a publicity stunt rather than a legitimate operational choice. They'll be watching every move we make, Maya warned. Looking for any mistake to prove their point. Then we'll just have to be perfect, Zara replied with quiet confidence. The flight preparations continued smoothly until an unexpected visitor arrived at the flight deck. William Garrison, the former chief pilot who had orchestrated Maya's demotion to cargo operations years earlier. Now retired, he still carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "A word?" Maya excused herself, following Garrison to the jet bridge where they could speak privately. "I won't pretend we've been friends," Garrison began without preamble. "And I won't apologize for decisions I made based on what I believe was best for this airline." "I didn't expect you would," Maya replied evenly. "But I'm not a fool either. I've been watching what's happened since Auckland." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You've proven me wrong, Chen. Not just about you, but about what makes a good pilot." Maya studied the older man's face, looking for signs of insincerity, but finding none. "The Singapore route is demanding," Garrison continued. "One of the longest in commercial aviation. I flew it for 12 years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a worn compass with Global Express's old logo etched on its brass case. "This was given to me by my first captain when I qualified for international routes. It's seen me through typhoons, equipment failures, and medical emergencies." He held it out to Maya. "Now it's yours." Maya hesitated before accepting the unexpected gift. "Why now?" "Because traditions only matter if they serve a purpose," Garrison replied. "The best ones adapt and survive. The rest should fade away." As he turned to leave, he added, "That Dreamliner is the most advanced commercial aircraft ever built. It deserves the best pilots Global Express has, regardless of what they look like." Back in the cockpit, Zara raised an eyebrow at the compass Maya placed on the center console. "A peace offering?" "More like a passing of the torch," Maya replied, still processing the unexpected encounter. The boarding process completed without incident, and soon they were cleared for pushback. As the massive Dreamliner taxied toward the runway, Maya noticed a group of young women in Global Express uniforms watching from the terminal windows, the newest cohort of the Pathways program, there to witness the historic flight. "Global 901, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 28L winds 290 at 12 knots. Maya advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the powerful engines respond. As the Dreamliner accelerated down the runway, she thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the setbacks, the struggles, the storm that had changed everything. "V1, rotate," Zara called out the critical speeds. Maya pulled back on the control column, and the advanced aircraft rose gracefully into the clear California sky, banking gently toward the Pacific as it began its journey to Singapore. In the passenger cabin, a special announcement played over the intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, Global Express is proud to welcome you aboard this historic inaugural flight of our Boeing 787 Dreamliner service to Singapore, commanded by Captain Maya Chen and First Officer Zara Khalid." The announcement was met with applause from many passengers who understood the significance of the moment. As they climbed through 30,000 feet, Maya engaged the autopilot and turned to Zara. "You know, when I was demoted to cargo operations, I never imagined I'd be here." "What kept you going?" Zara asked. "Most people would have given up, found another career." Maya thought about it as the vast Pacific stretched out beneath them. "I knew who I was, even when others tried to tell me differently. And I refused to let someone else's limitations become my reality." The flight to Singapore would take nearly 18 hours, one of the longest non-stop routes in commercial aviation. It would test their endurance, their skills, and their judgment, but Maya wasn't concerned. She'd weathered far worse storms than anything they might encounter over the Pacific. "We're making history today," Zara observed as they settled into cruise flight. "Not because we're women flying this route," Maya corrected, "but because we're the best pilots for the job, regardless of gender. That's the real victory." As darkness fell over the Pacific and most passengers drifted to sleep, Maya pulled out the note from Amelia Sato that she still carried in her flight bag, a reminder of why every flight mattered, why excellence was never optional. The compass from Garrison caught the light from the instrument panel, its needle pointing unerringly toward their destination. Maya smiled at the symbolism. Sometimes the old and new could work together, tradition and progress finding common purpose in the vast skies they all shared. This inaugural flight was more than a milestone for Global Express, or even for women in aviation. It represented a fundamental truth Maya had learned through all her struggles. Paths forward open not just through fighting against barriers, but by demonstrating such exceptional skill that those barriers become irrelevant. As the Dreamliner cruised silently through the night sky, Maya thought of all the women who would follow, not just those in the Pathways program, but others who would see what was possible when talent was given its rightful opportunity to soar. They weren't just flying an airplane across the Pacific. They were charting a course for others to follow, proving once again that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly who belongs in command when the future arrives. 5 years later, Maya stood on a raised platform in Global Express's gleaming new Global Operations Center in Houston, surrounded by a forest of screens displaying flight paths and weather systems spanning the entire planet. Behind her, a diverse group of airline executives, government officials, and media representatives waited expectantly for her presentation. "The future of aviation isn't just about better aircraft or more efficient routes," Maya began, her voice carrying throughout the vast room. "It's about reimagining who belongs in this industry and what leadership truly means in the skies." As the newly appointed Chief of Flight Operations for Global Express's entire international division, the youngest person and first woman to hold the position, Maya had spearheaded a transformation that extended far beyond her own career. The Pathways program had grown from a small mentorship initiative into an industry-leading talent development pipeline that had placed over 200 female pilots on flight decks worldwide. 5 years ago, less than 7% of our command pilots were women. Maya continued, gesturing toward a visualization that appeared on the central screen. Today, that number stands at 28%, the highest in the industry. More importantly, our safety metrics have improved by 34% during the same period. She paused, making eye contact with several skeptical-looking board members in the front row. "Excellence isn't just a moral imperative, it's good business. When we select the best qualified people, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or background, everyone benefits, especially our passengers." As applause filled the room, Maya caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Zara Khalid, now a senior captain on the Pacific routes, nodding in approval. Beside her sat Santos, recently promoted to Director of Engineering Operations, and Miller, who had become one of Global Express's most respected training captains. They had all come a long way from that stormy flight to Auckland. After the presentation, as executives mingled during the reception, Maya found herself approached by Charlotte Winters, the formidable CEO of Global Express. At 62, Winters had built the airline from a regional carrier into an international powerhouse, but had always maintained a traditional approach to airline management. "Impressive numbers, Chen," Winters said, swirling a glass of sparkling water. "But the board has concerns about your latest proposal." Maya had expected resistance. Her plan to create the industry's first integrated emergency response system, allowing pilots from different airlines to coordinate directly during international crises, represented a radical departure from the siloed approach that had dominated commercial aviation for decades. "Change always faces resistance," Maya replied, "especially when it challenges established power structures." Winters raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you think this is about? Power? Isn't it always?" Maya kept her tone respectful but firm. "We're asking airlines to share proprietary information and acknowledge they can't handle every crisis alone. That requires admitting vulnerability, something this industry has historically refused to do." Unexpectedly, Winters smiled. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago, willing to say what others only think." She lowered her voice. "Between us, I've been pushing for something like this since Flight 370 disappeared. The way airlines refused to share data during that search was a disgrace." Maya was surprised by the CEO's candor. Then why the resistance from the board? "Because change requires champions willing to stake their reputations on unproven ideas." Winters fixed Maya with an evaluating gaze. "Are you willing to be that champion, even if it means risking everything you've built?" The question hung in the air between them, a challenge and an opportunity wrapped together. "I took control of an aircraft in an impossible storm when everyone said I shouldn't," Maya replied quietly. "I've been taking calculated risks my entire career," Winters nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, because I'm announcing my retirement next quarter, and the board needs to see what potential successors are made of." Before Maya could process the implication of those words, they were interrupted by an urgent message delivered by a staff member. Maya excused herself to take the call in a private office adjacent to the main hall. "Captain Chen, this is Global Operations," came the tense voice of the duty manager. "We have a situation developing over the Pacific. Singapore Airlines Flight 619 has declared an emergency catastrophic decompression. Multiple injuries, attempting to divert to Guam but facing extreme weather." Maya's mind immediately shifted into crisis management mode. "What assets do we have in the vicinity?" Global 772 with Captain Khalid is approximately 50 minutes from their position, but they're low on fuel after diverting around the same storm system. Maya thought quickly. Contact Captain Khalid directly. Tell her I'm authorizing an immediate response under the Emergency Reciprocal Assistance Protocol. "Ma'am, that protocol hasn't been officially implemented yet. It's still in the proposal stage. Then consider this its first field test," Maya replied firmly. "Get me a secure line to Captain Khalid's flight deck immediately." Minutes later, Maya was looking at Zara's face on a secure video link, the cockpit of Global 772 visible behind her. "Maya, we've received the distress call," Zara reported, her expression serious but composed. "The Singapore aircraft has lost cabin pressure at 37,000 feet. They've descended to 10,000, but they're facing hurricane-force headwinds trying to reach Guam. What's your fuel situation?" "We've got about 30 minutes of extra reserve after our required alternate diversion fuel. Not much to work with." Maya pulled up the meteorological data on her tablet. The situation was grim. A massive Pacific storm system blocked the most direct routes to Guam, while alternate airports in the Philippines and Japan were too distant given the Singapore aircraft's compromised status. "Zara, I need you to implement pattern Sierra Echo Alpha." It was a theoretical flight pattern Maya had developed during her time as a cargo pilot, a way to use tailwinds from a storm system to slingshot around its perimeter rather than fighting through or diverting entirely around it. Zara's eyes widened slightly. That's never been field tested on a passenger aircraft. It has been in simulators. Extensively. Maya didn't add that she'd personally run those simulations during off hours, preparing for exactly this kind of scenario. It will get you close enough to establish visual contact and guide them through the narrow corridor between those two storm cells. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.